The only school that teaches you about money is the School of Hard Knocks. Until now.
You need to learn this business, and this is the time to do it.
Become an insider, so you have to know the rules before you get in the game.
Welcome to the Money MBA Podcast.
Have I got your attention now?
Where you'll learn how to be a master of money.
There's so many ways to make money today.
Let me show you in 2 seconds flat why the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Now here's your host, Jon Kutsmeda.
Everyone, welcome back. Look, we're halfway there. Here we are, part 3. If you've come this far, then you're enjoying it as much as I am. So let's keep the party going. What do you say? Welcome to part 3 of my conversation with Radigan Carter. Yeah, so the idea of this debt super cycle, I think, really picked up steam leading into 2008, right? And after 2008, like, this is the end. And you keep seeing this thing, the can get kicked further and further down the road. When the problem was started even longer, well before 2008 in terms of kicking the can. And what could have been maybe a little bit of a head cold has now become basically like life support. Right. And letting kind of the system cleanse itself out and going through recessions inherently aren't bad. They're good. They're the economy's natural way of getting rid of the inefficiencies and unproductive companies so that better innovation can come in. The companies that are healthier with healthy balance sheets, the CEOs who've managed, the P&L like a fiduciary, they're rewarded by getting larger market share and by becoming a more dominant player in the marketplace. We've kind of it's the economy of zombie companies, and so I'm in a slight disagreement. Well, maybe I'm just I'm not sure how to sit with it, because I've never pursued anything in my life with the expectation that somebody's going to save me. And so this idea that we need to make every decision going forward to protect the people who took no responsibility for a rainy day, I struggle with that a lot. I understand that it wouldn't be pretty for anybody if there was some major reset. So I'm not saying like, let's flick a switch, but I sometimes lack empathy for this like song and dance of like, woe is the retirees, or woe are the people who, they wouldn't. Can you imagine the impact this would have? I mean, you and I are having, it's midnight where I am. It's it's now 9:00 in the morning where you are. Certainly we find entertainment in this, but this is also it's about self-discovery and trying to be perpetually curious and to learn so that we can survive this war on our prosperity. And that's really what it is, for, as far as I'm concerned, for everybody. You can break it up into all these different things, but we are designed and programmed to survive. And in the modern world, that doesn't mean fighting off a saber-toothed tiger. It means fighting off insolvency. And the threats to insolvency and prosperity are, metaphorically speaking, their own saber-toothed tiger. And so to think that you're going to go out in the jungle and not be prepared to fight the saber-tooth, you're going to go the way of the dodo bird. You're a sitting duck and you're going to go extinct. And to think that the village needs to protect the village idiot who keeps walking outside of the gate, to face the monster with no skill set or preparation. Okay, we do that for a little bit, but now the village is overrun with village idiots and they're all trying to run out of the gate. And, the warriors with the skill sets who spent their entire life training to fight, these monsters, now are not only trying to protect themselves, but are also now looking out, for the necks of people who've taken no responsibility. So obviously, the majority aren't village idiots, but I feel like the burden that's being placed on the masses for, things that they had no response, they're not responsible for. There's decisions. I mean, you're speaking generationally, right? Like what you said, this burden of the next generation, it's extremely underappreciated. And you had a great conversation even about this with Dimitri. I'm not very sympathetic to it. And that's maybe, if I'm harsh in one category, it's perhaps that. And when you talk about our leadership being in their 70s, and I don't want to get political at all in this conversation, but you can't sit there and tell me Biden is a leader. The guy can't formulate a bloody sentence. And we are in this environment that is moving so quick where, at a very young age, I was given a computer. And so to a certain extent, I had the pleasure of growing up as a kid who spent most of his time outdoors. But once I started to kind of get into my teenage years, I started getting exposed to, computers, not just video games. I was playing Nintendo, of course, as a child and stuff like that, but actually having a computer. So tech is very familiar to me. And I consider myself a relatively smart guy. I'm not on the level with a lot of these quants and autistic brainiacs. I mean, I can't even keep up with half the time. And that's kind of the point. As much as the skill sets that I've developed, I'm having a hard time keeping pace. And even guys who I think in a lot of ways are geniuses in their own right, like Raoul Powell, openly admit, like, dude, I can't keep up. So how the hell is somebody in an ivory tower who's basically a geriatric going to be able to lead us appropriately when really their constituency is like, just keep us alive until we're no longer, until we're dead, right? So so it's really hard for me to have, all the things that are going on to me feel like so obvious that it's part of this cancer that's in the system, and the fact that though the doctors in charge won't let us treat it. And it's very frustrating. And so this lost generation, not even lost generation, but this generation of frustration, I think the fact that they fought back by reinventing their world, I think it's a story that I'm all for. I'm rooting for to continue to do what it's been doing, and it doesn't need me to root for it anymore. I mean, it's a boulder rolling down the hill.
So, you're exactly so. So I mean, think about that, right? Like, I'm not a tech guy at all. I openly say, hey, the last video game I played was on Super Nintendo and on Contra, right? Go down to the video game store and learning Contra. And, and if I feel like an idiot in this space, and you have Secretary Yellen talking about, hey, we got to do Bretton Woods 2.0. We're going to use 1945, and we're just going to slap that on as the model for, for 2021. It's absolutely ludicrous. And that's not, I'm not trying to, that's not anything personal or political. It's just, they're in their mid 70s.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is that, like, it's okay, man. You fought the Cold War, you won the Cold War, the Berlin Wall came down. Like, it's okay to retire and let some guys in their mid 40s that are just sitting on the hard plastic chairs in the back of the conference room have one of the nice seats at the table.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. It's the natural order of things. And, to your point on, I don't really think that we're in disagreement about like, hey, the system needs to take care of everybody, because I think that's impossible. It's not, I don't even think it's a natural state of things. Right. So, I mean, you've traveled quite a bit. I've traveled quite a bit. And I think any time that you start removing personal responsibility from people for their own lives, it gets to be a very bad thing. And unfortunately, I think the U.S. has kind of gotten there, right? To where, we have a system where a lot of people are taken care of. And the only thing that I'm concerned about is after being some places where things did fall apart and like kind of civilization got broken, is I'm very aware that if you just try to do a clean cut and say, you can't take someone from, a big screen TV and universal basic income and say, good luck, you're going to be responsible for yourself, because all they're going to do is turn around and look for someone to say, hey, you know what, this isn't right. Let's band together and, I'll take care of you. And I think how do you avoid that? Man, I got no idea. And that's kind of a bad thought in a way, right? I'm not trying to be negative, but I don't know how. I don't know. Like, I don't know. I have no idea what it looks like.
But isn't that where we are, right? So, I mean, we're at a point, this is populism. Like that's one of the results of it, is it not? Where you get to a point where, and I forgot to kind of highlight the comment you made, which is that we start to go back to this world of a decentralized world where everybody's kind of back to operating or functioning locally, and locally can be within their own, sovereign situation, state, country, government, in a lot of ways within their own family unit. And I think that's what's really been broken is the fact that you don't, because as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about my parents, and what if the system just stopped? What if the their retirement check wasn't coming in, or Social Security wasn't coming in? And again, I'm privileged in a lot of ways to be able to say this, but I'm also privileged because I've made sacrifices along the way to kind of have confidence that, I'll be able to navigate this. But my thought is, as a family, we would come together and support each other. And I know not everybody has family. And so I think that's where you start to kind of create these fractions of gangs. And it doesn't have to be a gang in terms of the way we think about it, but Democrats and Republicans they're gangs, right? The way they function now, it's like two literally like West Side Story in real life. And so you can break that down into smaller microcosms, but I feel like survival is everybody's mission. And it will look different for everybody if we go into some sort of chaotic environment like that. And I'm with you. I'm not necessarily promoting it. I'm just saying that I don't think Janet Yellen, Joe Biden, even the Donald Trumps, I mean, the age gap, there's not enough understanding of where we're going and who they're leading to do this right. And so I don't really know, like you, how it plays out, but I think a lot of things we're talking about are obvious pieces on that chessboard.
I mean, could you imagine trying to explain to a regulator who's 75 that, hey, this platform that's being designed in Singapore, the design is to replace BlackRock as a passive investment holding vehicle, because the goal is to have stocks be on the blockchain and actually replace prime brokerage, because that's part of a broken system too. And I think GameStop clearly highlighted that. I think that actually brought that part of a not well-known piece of the puzzle into clear focus for a lot of people. But I mean, imagine trying to explain to a 75-year-old regulator how, yeah, this app that's being built by a bunch of 20-year-olds is going to put stocks on the blockchain, and it's going to be completely transparent, and you're actually going to be able to see investment managers' performance in real time. And you don't need a degree or a CFA even, and the guy is some cartoon avatar eating chicken tenders and kung pao sauce, and and he's beating a guy in a Wall Street office, and he doesn't have to commute or live in Manhattan. Like they're going to hate that. They're going to hate everything about that. I mean, they're going to listen to that and they're going to say, "Hey, Radigan, why are you trying to destroy my world? It was a pretty nice world."
Yeah. Which coincides with everything we've talked about so far. And I'm ear to ear, and I obviously laughed out loud at that. But the other thing I really enjoy about that disruption and the way you described it is it's making, at least to me, I feel like I've got a pretty good sense of humor. It's making life fun again. It's making this whole game. It's a game, and it's all a game, and it's understanding the rules that you're dealing with and playing with. And I think most people don't realize the rules of the game that they're playing. And that's why they do so poorly in the game of wealth and finance and prosperity. And these guys realized the game, realized how simple the game was, started gaming the game and doing it in such a comedic way where, like, we communicate via memes more than we communicate any other way. And I like comedy, man. And I think it's emerging this disruptive, revolutionary thing, which I can get behind. And it's doing it in a really funny way. And in a lot of ways, like, it bothers a lot of people. But again, look at the generation that's doing this. They found a way to laugh in the face of misery and then change the system. It is the Robin Hood story, right? Like, and it is this underdog story, and I think it's underappreciated on many levels. And in regards to the point you made about regulators, many moons ago, the first time my business went through an audit, which as a banking entity, it's commonplace. It's not something you go through because you did something wrong. And this was after Dodd-Frank, after 2000. So I think it was probably like 2000, maybe 11. This is the first time the Hawaii state banking regulators actually started enforcing or going through the process of enforcing and checking up on people in the financial industry after Dodd-Frank was rolled out. So they were so slow to actually figure out what they had to do with the regulation. My main company name, the corporate entity, it begins with the letter A. And so I was very, very early in this auditing process, probably because they were just going through alphabetical. And oh my God, what an experience. So first they roll in to audit me like I'm a bank, like a real bank, like 5 people with their like roller bags behind them. And it's just so silly. And I'm like, you realize I'm whatever old I was, like early 30s, like surfer dude in his board shorts, virtual office. Like I was so ahead of the curve in terms of like running a business with its bare bone, necessities to function. I was just, cutting the margins wherever I could. I was very much, I guess, early DeFi in the real world. But watching these guys try to audit me was so funny. And they didn't understand what they were auditing. And some of the loan products we were doing, which we can talk about because I was doing a ton of VA stuff at that point, and they didn't understand the product. And I was literally educating the regulators during my audit on what they were auditing. And of course, the government then sent me a bill for that. But at the end of the audit, some of the exit interview stuff that they were going through and some of the questions they were asking me were around security. And again, it's almost like they have this like checkbox that they're going through, asking me really dumb stuff about like, do people in your company have their own like computers, and how do they access the data? Because this is a lot of like, private individuals, private information. And some of the questions they were asking, it was just so funny. It was so clear to me how far digital security had gone versus the world that they were existing in. And it was so frustrating to go through that as a business person, certainly as an entrepreneur, but especially in terms of demographics. Because I'm like, you guys don't even know what you're auditing, right? Like you have no idea where the world is, where technology. This is such a waste of time. It's a waste of taxpayer money. It's a waste of my money because you're going to bill me for it, and you're achieving nothing. If I was truly a criminal, you lack the ability to identify that. And I think, to me, I have a lot of little experiences like that put a spotlight for me on how the path that pretty much everybody else is on, how it's a dead end, and how it's been leading for a dead end for a long time, even outside of the corruption that we talk about in terms of companies being bailed out, even the honest hard work. Like, these guys are just doing their job, but they're serving no value. Whereas a blockchain basically does their job for free and instantaneously, and it's public. And I still think that is massively underappreciated. And I'm not saying like a digital ledger is somehow like, the most revolutionary thing that ever existed, but it's the way that Bitcoin has introduced it to the world in a way that it's forcing everyone to accept the fact that a lot of what we do just doesn't need to be done. And it certainly doesn't need to be done the way that we're doing it.
Well, and the way I think about it is, what helps me is if I zoom out and I think about this in terms of history and financial innovation, right? So if we go all the way back to the times of the Crusades, what was the financial innovation there? It was traveler's checks. Because, pilgrims to the Holy Land realized, hey, you know what? Taking my gold is a bad idea because I get robbed on the trail. So, hey, there's this weird group of dudes called the Templars. I can take my gold to them in Europe, and they give me a slip of paper, and then I can redeem that for gold when I get to Jerusalem. That's a great invention. And and that was kind of that was a financial innovation there, right? It was essentially they invented the check, against deposits. And then, fast forward a couple hundred years, and you have the 15th century with the Medicis and doing double entry accounting, right? Which is essentially still used today. Yep. The only difference is that you have IBM 1964 mainframes in the bottom of banks that, helped Neil Armstrong, walk on the moon, right. Now doing double entry accounting, at the Bank of New York. And, but they're still doing double entry accounting. Well, the next innovation after that is blockchain, and really, I think that's what really helped me think about blockchain, was realizing that it was just a leap forward in financial technology, just like everything else has been for the last several hundred years. It's just the next step forward. And each time that there's a step forward, it creates opportunities, and it also does away with things that are redundant. It's just the way it works.
And with that in mind, you're seeing this explosion with NFTs. And, when you talk about the GameStop Robinhood thing and how it put a spotlight on the broker dealers and kind of that, the inefficiencies there, the NFTs right now are kind of being used in a very goofy, speculative way. And it's really like just JPEGs and Beeple art. But just like Bitcoin, let's say 2013 and in that early stage of things wasn't truly understood and wasn't being used at its full potential. And a lot of what we've been talking about here is how the adoption curve accelerates. I think NFTs and the value that they're going to provide by furthering decentralization and creating this verifiable ownership on things like stocks, on things like real estate, is going to catch a lot of people by surprise because they're not paying attention to what it really is and what it really means in a digital world where where you have deep fakes and all this other type of stuff. It's the next logical conclusion or the next big peg in this disruptive movement where we're like, we don't need you to verify. And it goes back to everything you've been saying during this entire conversation, which is at the core, trust. it's trustless, and it's trustless one step further, which is like truly verifiable. It's not just about fungibility. It's the non-fungible element of it that gives you true ownership of something potentially in the real world or in a metaverse where there's only one in existence. And this is going to happen so much faster than we even think it is. And it's going to be hard for even guys like you and I, or people like you and I, who are trying to stay on top of it and understand the value it creates, let alone those who are making, real societal decisions who aren't even paying attention. And so I guess we can kind of wrap up the discussion about cryptocurrencies with that in mind, but I definitely want to, hand the mic back to you and see what you think about NFTs and some of the things that have been going on, because I think it's clearly the next phase of this, and I'm excited to talk to people about it.
So what I'm excited about with NFTs is seeing what projects shake out that survive the drawdown that they're in. Because like everything before this, right? You have the initial hype phase, and then, it's cool, it's edgy, because, artists are always kind of out there on the fringes of, doing the next cool thing before society really adopts it, right? And the other thing that I'm looking forward to with NFTs is when you mentioned the deep fakes, but when you think about how good video games are getting and AI, or maybe AI is not the right word for it, but computer generated images, like I don't even know the right terminology for it, right? But to where you don't even need models anymore. You can have computer generated people doing the modeling for whatever your products are. Eventually that's going to get to the point to where we're not going to even be able to trust what we see on a screen. Did that really happen? Is that just a made up reality that I'm seeing? Like we're not gonna be able to believe it unless the thing that I like about NFTs is that's going to give an easily verifiable identification code to where, hey, did the president really say that?
Right.
I don't know. Scan it. Scan the code on the screen, and it'll tell you if that's really the president of the United States. Okay,
Right.
yeah, that's really the president of the United States. It has it's verified on that, and that's kind of a in a way, to me, that's kind of a scary reality or a scary kind of future scenario to think about. And it's not as fun as like goofy pixel NFTs, but I think it's also an important role for it to be able to play on being able to verify reality too. Maybe at some point in the future. But I think the other thing that NFTs really highlights is how this longer term shift, it's making things that are uncool not going to be around, because in a way this entire shift really doesn't need you or I talking about it or trying to encourage it, because once you make something uncool, people don't want to do it, and people naturally gravitate to what they perceive as being cool and accepted by other people in society. And I think the tech being adopted is just furthering that. How many people are going to be excited about, adopting 1945 technology and, having to call and do a wire transfer, by talking to someone on the phone? That's not cool. That's not the future direction this is going. And I think NFTs and, guys that are going to be just smoking, hedge funds from their Ferrari gaming chair, while they're eating chicken tenders. I think that's funny. I think it's funny. And I don't think you can even really fight that direction, because people are naturally going to gravitate towards it. So,
well, and that's kind of, I think, another big element of our conversation is this, people trying to hold on to whatever control or advantage that they have. And by doing that, it's like they're hoarding what they've held so dear as whether their power or their advantage. And because their grip is so strong on that, they don't have enough room in their arms to embrace this thing that's coming, and they're going to be left behind. they're going to have to drop the loot to pick up the next best thing. And right now, a lot of what you're seeing is this pushback. And I get for broader adoption in the current world, you need various regulatory elements to come into play. But I really think that's within the current paradigm of things. And that current paradigm may last only a couple of years before regulation is no longer really relevant. And it's kind of some of the things that we've talked about where who are you to tell me what I'm allowed to put in my body? And sovereignty is a very touchy subject for me. It's something I believe in very, very deeply. If I have a religion, it's sovereignty. And so this idea, like, who are you to tell me what I can invest in, what I can't eat, what drugs I can do, where I can go? And I think that is going to be more and more something that, like you're saying, becomes cool, right? Maybe, a couple of years ago, being an entrepreneur was like the first phase of independence, and that was a cool thing. I'm seeing more and more of this libertarian state of mind, which is not so much about being libertarian. It's more about just people understanding their self-sovereignty and having the right to make their own decisions. And we've been under this veil of government and government protection, and government's going to take care of me. It's almost a generational thing, which has been a theme we've been talking about. And I feel like a lot of that is going away because I don't want you to protect me because you've never done anything well for me. You keep fucking me over. You keep screwing things up. And whenever things do blow up, you put me in a worse situation. So I don't want your regulation. I don't want your protection. I'll make decisions for myself. So in these early stage of things, because we're still dealing with an old legacy system, I understand, especially from an investment standpoint, regulation is just going to usher in way more capital and liquidity. But I'm very, very curious to see how relevant any of that is in the next decade.
And what I find interesting about that, right? Because when you start playing around with this technology, eventually, you really start wondering, hey, at what point do they just have to change entire tax codes to adopt to this? Because especially once you really start, if you ever get on and start playing around on like decentralized exchanges and that,
right?
1099s, that's a 20th century invention,
right?
And I know the initial knee-jerk reaction for regulators and maybe the older generation is going to be, well, you know what, that needs to be illegal then, we're just not going to participate on that. And my pushback to that would be, hey man, you're really missing how the U.S. government does business. U.S. government, its motto is leave no dollar behind. So it's not going to close itself off to like a new marketplace. If anything, it's going to try to go after. We have half the capital in the world in our capital markets in the U.S. If you want to say, hey, we can't, we're not going to adopt decentralized exchanges or let U.S. citizens participate or be open to that kind of innovation. I don't know. I think that would be a tragic mistake. And I don't even think that would be sustainable in the long term. I don't think that would be, I don't think that's the way, I don't think the U.S. would be willing to give that up. They like having access to all the capital markets. So I think, what you're saying about, regulators adapting in the future, I think that's 100% accurate. It's just a matter of, I think it'll be interesting though, when they make those changes. Well, once you make those changes, that's kind of a fair system then, right? Because then you're actually paying for consumption, which I'd be cool with that. You want to drive a Ferrari? Cool, drive a Ferrari. You just get taxed for driving a Ferrari. I would much rather than tax consumption than tax my income. So, but not trying to go down that rabbit hole.
That's a conversation that's a 4-hour one in itself. And
yeah.
And once you go down self-sovereignty, taxation comes up, and I do writing quite a bit myself, and that was one of the first things I ever really wrote because it was so personal to me. Because one of the first times I ever felt like I climbed out of this hell, which was years and years and years of trying to grow a business and living off of credit cards and failing and literally having my back against the wall. Once I crawled out of it and I had this huge year for the first time, I remember I still visually remember where I was and what I was doing when I had a conversation with my accountant. I was literally like getting crap out of my trunk on my way to another client meeting on like a Saturday after working all day, telling me that literally half of what I had just made, which was enough to, more than enough to buy 2 houses, was going to the government. A government that did nothing to help me in the bigger picture, right? Like in terms of what we're talking about here is like what those tax dollars were going to do. They weren't going to really benefit me. And how hard I had worked and how much stress I had carried, and to feel like I finally did it, and then to have the government take half of that, it set me down a very interesting rabbit hole, right? And when I started my business, I started in 2009, literally in the midst of the crisis. Right? I started a mortgage company, and that crisis pulled me down the rabbit hole of like, what is going on here? Like, how is this happening? What is truly happening? And that was really the beginning of my journey. And when that conversation with my CPA happened, and I finally felt like I got out of the well, and then to have the government kick me back down the well and take half of what I had earned, it permanently changed me and sent me down another rabbit hole. Since that point, roughly, that was probably 2012-ish to now, almost a decade later, the amount of energy I have spent creating self-sovereignty in other countries, multiple residencies, building these tax structures that really are only designed for the wealthy, moving to Puerto Rico, stuff like that. I mean, what a waste of energy. Just a giant waste of energy, but it's protected a ton of my wealth. So it was a great use of my time, but in the grand scheme of things, why am I running around trying to dodge a system that's really designed to screw the average guy? Because the wealthy, anytime politicians and government talk about taxing the rich, nothing pisses me off more, because number one, why take more of the pie? Why not help make the pie bigger, right? Keep your small sliver, but just make the pie bigger. And they just keep going for bigger and bigger slices of a smaller pie. But the reality is, it's all bullshit, because the system's still designed so that the rich have such a small portion that's, going to get taxed, that go ahead, take 90% of that small sliver that you can now access, because I don't really care, because everything else is, in offshore companies, and it's all legal. It's all allowed. It's in the tax code. Yep. But the amount of lawyers you have to pay, the amount of a mental bandwidth that you have to spend doing all of that, I mean, it's so inefficient. And these are some of the things that I feel like, in terms of replacing the old guard, a lot of the benefits to the United States that can happen when you put younger people in place, because they're coming with this philosophy. Like, it's not that taxes are necessarily not something that, it's not to say that taxation can't be used effectively, but the way it currently exists in the current tax code is such a nightmare that you're wasting so much, like the amount of creativity I could be applying to other things instead of trying to protect, my money from taxation, legally, mind you, it's exhausting, right? I could be doing things, literally things for society.
So you'll appreciate this, because you've been in a similar situation. And, if you tell that story about taking things out of your trunk and being on the phone with your accountant and realizing you just, have to give half of that away. If you've never been in that situation, like, you don't understand, like, just how frustrating, like, that conversation is. Right. And so, going back to, so when I went back to Afghanistan in 2016, and then rolling it over to calendar year 2017, right? I took profit on a trade that bumped me into the top tax bracket, right? So picture this is I was literally in Afghanistan for a second year after fighting to get back there, and the government was taking 41% of my money.
Yeah.
While I was over there, and that was really the point to where I was just like, this is like, I'm doing everything I possibly can to get ahead, and you're taking 41% off the table.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it just feels that, and I think I spent like maybe 2 weeks in the US in 2017. Right. So, I mean, are you telling me that, did I drive on the roads for 2 weeks for 6 figures of taxes? Is that what that was? And, and that's where, I don't think, the one thing that does bother me though, right, is, we're talking about the positive aspect of our generation and younger wanting to take more responsibility. But what does bother me is just how socialist an aspect of our generations are, right? So it's almost kind of like it's almost like you kind of fall into one or two camps, right? You're either about personal responsibility and doing your own thing, or you think that, hey, you know what, we need to go even further and just have universal basic income. We need more control, and it's just, and that's a path that actually really bothers me. And I think that, when we think about the generational shift, I don't know if we'll see it next election cycle. And to me, like, I'm not a political guy at all, right? I don't even really think that there's much difference between the two parties.
Agreed.
Because, people ask me about, they're like, hey, how can you believe that? I'm like, hey man, get deployed. It doesn't really matter. The boss changes, the mission stays the same,
Right.
And so, like, I don't think there's any that much difference between it. So to me, we can look at 2024. I think there's probably enough boomers that kind of hold the line. So, like, does it really matter if Biden gets reelected or if a Republican gets in? Doesn't really matter. I think it's going to be someone else who's over 70, right? It's going to be that generation because they're terrified of letting go of the reins of power. But I think that that's going to cause the pendulum to really swing by maybe 2028, and then it'll be, and then we'll see what's going on, and hopefully it goes more towards the personal responsibility side than the more socialism side. But I don't know. I wouldn't take that bet, and I don't want to. I don't think that's really getting into politics to kind of think about a generational shift.
No, and you've made a comment about this. I think you made a Twitter post where you were trying to do a bank wire, and you kind of got into it with the teller or whoever was assisting you. And your big takeaway from that was, like, he was doing you a favor that you had to go through this bullshit just to send your money because, God forbid, it's sent improperly. We protect your money. And the comment you made was like, are we literally at a point now where, people can't take responsibility for putting in, scanning a QR code correctly?
Right. And that's that's the value proposition. I have to call you during a certain 6-hour window during the day and repeat back, like, verbatim, word for word. Like, you're spelling like Alpha, Sierra, Tango. like you're spelling the word back to me. Like, that's where we're at. Do I have your permission to send? Yes. Hit the red button, send the wire. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. And I kind of, in a way, when you talk about, personal, kind of like personal, sovereignty of your life.
Yeah.
I almost take that even one step further to where I don't even want to be around other people that don't have that same philosophy, to where maybe philosophy is not the right word, but like a certain set of values, right? I mean, if you're not willing to if you're not willing to take personal responsibility of your life and do everything you possibly can to be as strong of a person as, make your environment as beautiful as possible, and just, you only got one shot at life. So if you're not trying to do the absolute best you can and help other people, like I'm just not cool with cynicism or mediocrity. Like that doesn't even appeal to me. And I kind of feel like if you want the government to take care of you, that's kind of the route you go down, right? Why do you feel like you need someone to double check your wire transfer? Well, because I'm afraid I'm going to mess it up. Like what a horrible way to live. Like,
Yeah.
that's you don't even have enough trust in yourself for that. But anyways, I don't mean to be getting off on a tangent on that.
But I think that it kind of crystallizes, a lot of what we've been talking about here, which is there's this, maybe we'll call it a generational line in the sand. A big part on one side, it's just how they've always done it, the boomers. And then there's another part where it's just kind of been a core of their existence, or like their set of values are somewhat broken to the extent that when they say, I can't do something, or I might not be good at that, or I'm afraid that I might get that wrong. When I have that feeling, to me, it's a weakness, and I want to fix that. Like, I don't need to be the expert at anything, but to be completely to lack that level of independence, I can't imagine that existence. Like we're talking about, this is as simple as just putting in the right information when you send something. And look, we've all have sent an email to somebody because we spelled the name wrong, or we were typing too quick. And so things like that happen, but it's an email. Who gives a shit? If you're sending somebody $50,000 and if you don't have the ability to double check, triple check, and so I think there is kind of a generational divide, where on the other side of that, I've been in a place where I don't think I've actually ever torched any cryptocurrency, but I accidentally copied an Ethereum address from the browser instead of actually copying it from the Etherscan or what they had sent me. And there's uppercase, lowercase. And I fortunately caught that, or I didn't actually send it but that was almost a mistake that I made. I've done a number of things on really shitty crypto exchanges, like some of these obscure ones where you have to go to if you want to buy some really garbage altcoins. And you just have, having a fat finger.
Just being a full degenerate, huh?
Yeah, I trust me, man. We don't need to go down there, but I've definitely, I own some stuff that sometimes I don't even want to admit that I do. But I've had a few fat finger moments, right? So, but you learn from that, right? And I think it goes back to this idea of going all in, because you're not willing to go through some of the journey that is required to develop an expertise. What is it? 10,000 hours is what it requires to develop mastery or have an expertise. I don't think you need to do that in a lot of these things, where if you just put a little bit of time in, you've got enough of a grasp that you can keep up with the pace, and you can function, and you can have fun with it, and you can enjoy it, and you can prosper. And so there's a very unique divide in terms of those two generational lines, where a lot of what we've been talking about, it feels like there's a generation there that is willing to scrape their knee again in a digital sense. And it's nice to see that. And I'm all for that. Whereas on the other side, they want someone to kiss it and blow it and make them feel better about it. And I just don't know how that tug of war is, how long it's going to last, but eventually the one side's going to get weak or die. Right. And so you got to start paying attention to the ones that are ushering in this new world where you have, greater responsibility. The thing that gets tricky as investors, and a lot of what we're talking about and have been talking about, is very philosophical, right? We're being very general. It's a lot of narratives. It's things after this conversation that we'll internalize and then dive deeper on. But the timeline for a lot of this, some of these things, the way they'll play out could take a lot longer because of regulation, because of the strong hand of government, because of the hegemony of the US and a lot of the other geopolitical elements that you talked about on your podcast when you were on Hidden Forces. But you don't need to be making a timeline bet. You're not Peter Schiff, right? You're not John McAfee, right? You're not trying to make some outlandish in 2022 XYZ is going to happen. You can see the sun rising on the east. Like eventually it's going to be overhead. So just plan for that. And I don't think enough people are really doing that. They're just closing their eyes and pretending like the sun isn't actually rising.
Thank you for listening to the Money MBA Podcast with your host, Jonathan Kutsmeda.
It's also my pleasure to see to it that decent, hardworking people in this community aren't robbed blind by a pack of money-mad pirates.
To access more great content, visit us online at moneymba.com.
That's where the money is. And more than that, control.
There's only one person in the world to decide what I'm going to do, and that's me.
And I am deadly serious about that. That's it. I'm done.